Chapter 1. Stop giving people power. You need to understand something that most people never realize in their entire life. Nobody is actually hurting you. Not really. People speak, people act, people judge, people reject, people insult, people misunderstand. That all happens. Yes, that is real. But the pain you feel from it, that is not them. That is you. You have a choice in every moment. You always have had a choice. You just never noticed it. The choice is simple, but powerful beyond belief. Do I take this personally, or do I let it pass? Do I assign meaning, or do I stay neutral? That's the key. Most people fail here. Every single time. They don't just hear words. They absorb them. They store them. They replay them. They attach identity to them. A random comment becomes a belief. A stranger's opinion becomes emotional weight. A moment becomes a memory that controls behavior. And I need you to hear this clearly. What they said is theirs. What I believe is mine. Repeat that internally. Again and again. What they said is theirs. What I believe is mine. Because if you forget that separation, you lose control of your emotional world. And once you lose control of your emotional world, you give power to people who are not even thinking about you anymore. That's the irony. You are suffering over things they have already forgotten. You are replaying words they moved on from seconds after speaking. And that is not strength. That is emotional dependency. You don't need their permission to feel calm. You don't need their approval to stay stable. You don't need their validation to maintain peace. But most people live like they do. Now understand this deeply. People can only control the emotions you hand to them. Not the emotions they try to trigger. Not the words they say. Not the actions they take. Only what you decide to give away. Attention is energy. And energy given carelessly becomes weakness. Every time you react emotionally without thinking, you are transferring power. You are saying, what you did defines my internal state. But that is false. That is the illusion. And if you continue living inside that illusion, your peace will always be fragile. Let me make this practical. Imagine two people receive the same insult, same words, same tone, same situation. One person laughs it off, shrugs, moves on. Why? Because they understood something simple. This is noise, not truth. The other person, they go home. They replay it. They analyze it. They build stories around it. What did they mean? Did they disrespect me? Do people think less of me now? And just like that, a 5-second moment becomes a 5-day emotional prison. Same event, completely different outcome. Not because of the world, because of interpretation. That's where your power is. Not in controlling people, not in stopping insults, not in demanding respect, but in controlling meaning. And I want you to repeat this mentally every time something hits you emotionally. It's not about what happened. It's about what I decide it means. Because the truth is simple. Most suffering is not caused by events. It is caused by interpretation of events. You don't suffer because someone spoke. You suffer because you believed it mattered more than it actually does. Now let's go deeper. Why do people give away this power so easily? Because they are trained to seek validation. From childhood, praise feels safe. Criticism feels dangerous. Acceptance feels like survival. Rejection feels like danger. So what happens? The mind starts outsourcing emotional stability. It starts saying, tell me who I am. And when you live like that, you are not in control anymore. You are reactive. And reaction is weakness disguised as emotion. Real strength is pause. Real strength is delay. Real strength is control before interpretation. You have a choice, always, between reaction and reflection, between emotion and observation, between surrendering power or keeping it. And that's the discipline you must build. Now listen carefully. You are not trying to become someone who feels nothing. That's not the goal. The goal is awareness. The goal is control over interpretation. The goal is freedom from automatic emotional reactions. Because when you stop giving people power over your emotional state, something changes. You become harder to disturb. You become harder to manipulate. You become harder to shake. Not because life gets easier, but because your mind becomes stronger. And strong minds don't collapse under weak provocations. They filter, they observe, they choose, and they move on. So here is your instruction for today. When someone says something negative, pause. Don't absorb it immediately. Ask one question internally. Is this fact, or is this just noise? That one question breaks emotional conditioning. That one question restores control. That one question puts you back in charge. You are not obligated to accept everything you hear. You are not required to internalize everything directed at you. You are not designed to be an emotional sponge for the world. You are designed to choose. And every time you choose not to react, you reclaim power quietly, but permanently. Now remember this. What they said is theirs. What I believe is mine. That is separation. That is clarity. That is control. And without that separation, you will always live emotionally unstable, reacting to people who don't even carry your thoughts with them. But when you master this, you become grounded, unshakable, difficult to disturb, not because life stops hitting you, but because nothing sticks unless you allow it to. And that is where real power begins. You don't need to fight every battle. You don't need to answer every insult. You don't need to prove every point. You just need to understand one thing. Not everything deserves access to your mind. And once you protect that space, everything changes. Because now you are no longer controlled by external voices. You are guided by internal discipline. And that is the foundation of emotional control. You have now started to take back your power. But this is only the beginning. Because if you can stop giving people control over your emotions, you can also learn how to control your reactions completely. Chapter 2. Your reaction is the real battlefield. Let's make something extremely clear before we go any further. Your life is not controlled by events. Your life is controlled by your reaction to events. That is the truth most people never understand. They believe the problem is outside them. The insult, the rejection, the delay, the betrayal, the stress. But none of those things have power on their own. They are neutral, empty, without meaning, until your mind assigns meaning to them. And that is where everything changes. Because events don't decide your emotional state, your reaction does. You have a choice, always, in every moment. You can pause, or you can react. You can observe, or you can explode. You can stay in control, or you can hand control away instantly. That's the key, but most people never pause long enough to realize it. They react instantly, emotion first, thought later. And by the time they think, the damage is already done. Because once you react emotionally, you are no longer responding to reality. You are responding to interpretation. And interpretation can be wrong. Let me repeat this clearly. Events are neutral until your reaction labels them. Neutral until you call them good or bad. Neutral until you decide if they are disaster or opportunity. That means the battlefield is not outside. The battlefield is inside. Inside your mind. Inside your response system. Inside that split second between stimulus and reaction. That is where your life is won or lost. Now listen carefully. Emotional people fight the wrong enemy. They fight people. They fight circumstances. They fight situations. But none of that is the real problem. The real problem is uncontrolled reaction. Because a person who cannot control their reaction will always be controlled by others. Not directly, not obviously, but indirectly. Through emotions, through triggers, through manipulation, through misunderstanding. And this is why most people stay stuck. Not because life is hard, but because their reactions are weak. Now I want you to understand something deeper. When someone insults you, that insult is just information, nothing more. But your reaction turns it into identity. When someone ignores you, that is just behavior, but your reaction turns it into rejection. When something goes wrong, that is just an event, but your reaction turns it into panic. Do you see the pattern? Nothing is powerful until you react. So the real question is not, what happened to me? The real question is, what did I decide this means? You have a choice. In every situation, pause first, react later. Or don't react at all. That is not weakness. That is control. And control is what separates emotional people from disciplined people. Let me give you a real example. Two people face the same problem. Same criticism at work, same harsh comment from someone they respect. One person reacts immediately, defensive, emotional, angry. They argue, they explain, they overthink later. Their mind stays stuck in the moment for hours, even days. The other person, they pause, they breathe, they don't respond immediately. They observe the situation instead of entering it emotionally. Later, they decide if it even deserves attention. Same situation, completely different outcome, because reaction changed. That is the real battlefield. And if you don't control that battlefield, you lose without even realizing you are fighting. Now understand this deeply. Reaction is a habit, not a personality trait, not who you are, a habit. And habits can be changed, but only when you interrupt them. That means the first goal is not perfection. The first goal is delay. Delay your reaction, even by a few seconds, because in that delay, control returns. In that delay, awareness returns. In that delay, power returns. You have a choice. Every single time, pause first, react later, or don't react at all. That's the discipline. That's the training. That's the shift. Now let's break another illusion. People think reacting makes them strong. They think speaking fast means confidence. They think defending themselves immediately means respect. But in reality, uncontrolled reaction is emotional weakness, because it shows you are governed by external triggers. Strong people don't rush to respond. Strong people don't get pulled into every emotional trap. Strong people observe first, then decide. Now I want you to practice something simple. When something triggers you today, do this. Stop. Do not speak immediately. Do not type immediately. Do not react immediately. Just pause and ask yourself, is this worth my peace? That one question changes everything, because most things are not. Most insults are empty. Most opinions are irrelevant. Most situations don't deserve emotional investment. But without pause, you cannot see that. Without pause, everything feels urgent, and urgency destroys clarity. Now here is the core transformation of this chapter. You are not trying to eliminate emotions. You are learning to lead them. You are not trying to become numb. You are becoming aware. You are not trying to avoid life. You are learning how not to be controlled by it. That's the difference. Now repeat this internally. Pause first, react later, or don't react at all. Again, pause first, react later, or don't react at all. Because that is your new system. Not automatic reaction, but intentional response. And once you build that gap between trigger and reaction, you start to notice something powerful. You stop regretting what you say. You stop overreacting emotionally. You stop getting pulled into unnecessary conflict. You start becoming calm in situations that used to control you. And people will notice, not because you changed loudly, but because you changed silently. Now here is the truth you must carry forward. The world does not control you. Your reactions do. And if you master your reaction, you master your entire emotional life. You don't need to win arguments. You don't need to respond to everything. You don't need to prove anything instantly. You only need one skill: control the pause. Because in that pause, you are free. And when you learn to live in that space between stimulus and response, you stop being reactive and start being powerful. Now that you understand the battlefield of reaction, we move deeper. Because even if you control your reactions, there is still something else silently influencing your peace. Chapter 3. Detach from what you cannot control. Let's get one thing absolutely clear. Most of your stress does not come from life itself. It comes from your need to control things you were never meant to control. That's the real source of suffering. Not events, not people, not circumstances, but resistance to reality. And the moment you understand this, your entire emotional world begins to change. You have a choice, always. Either you control what is yours, or you try to control what is not. And every time you choose the second option, you lose peace. Every time. Now listen carefully. You cannot control other people's loyalty. You cannot control their honesty. You cannot control their opinions. You cannot control their moods. You cannot control their timing. You cannot control their decisions. That is reality. And resisting that reality is where suffering begins. But here is what you can control: your standards, your effort, your discipline, your boundaries, your reactions, your focus. That's the key. Everything else is outside your authority. But most people live as if they control everything. They wait for people to behave correctly. They wait for closure. They wait for explanations. They wait for apologies. They wait for timing to make sense. And while they wait, they suffer. Because waiting for control over uncontrollable things is emotional self-destruction. You don't need their permission to be calm. You don't need their explanation to move forward. You don't need their closure to heal. But emotionally dependent people act like they do. And that is where the trap is. Let's be honest. Suffering grows when you demand control over uncontrollable things. That is the pattern. You demand someone to stay. They leave. You suffer. You demand someone to understand you. They don't. You suffer. You demand timing to be perfect. It isn't. You suffer. But none of that suffering comes from reality. It comes from resistance. And resistance is optional. Now let's go deeper. Peace begins when you release what you cannot control. Not ignore, not deny. Release. That is active detachment. That is emotional maturity. That is strength. You have a choice. Either hold on tightly to things slipping out of your control, or let them go and reclaim your mind. Now I want you to imagine something. A person is waiting for closure. Someone left them without explanation. No final conversation, no clear ending, just silence. And now their mind is stuck. What happened? Why did they leave? What did I do wrong? And they replay memories like a courtroom trial, trying to find answers that will never come. But here is the truth. Closure is not something you receive. Closure is something you decide. And until you understand that, you remain mentally trapped in someone else's silence. Now listen closely. Freedom begins when you stop needing it. That is the shift. Not when they explain, not when they return, not when they apologize, but when you stop needing any of it to move forward. That's the key. You don't need their permission to continue your life. You don't need their explanation to regain peace. You don't need their presence to rebuild yourself. But as long as you believe you do, you remain stuck. Now let's break another illusion. People think detachment means not caring. That is wrong. Detachment means not depending. You can care about people. You can love people. You can invest in people. But you cannot depend on them for emotional stability. Because dependency creates fragility. And fragile minds break easily. Strong minds do not depend. Strong minds participate without attachment to outcome. Now I want you to repeat this internally. I control my effort. I do not control outcomes. Again, I control my effort. I do not control outcomes. That is discipline, not emotional chaos. Now let's make this practical. If someone is inconsistent with you, you have a choice. Chase understanding that may never come, or accept behavior as information and move forward. If someone is unclear with you, you have a choice. Wait endlessly for clarity, or create clarity through action and boundaries. If someone leaves without explanation, you have a choice. Stay mentally stuck in their absence, or accept reality and continue building your life. You always have a choice. Always. But most people choose attachment, and attachment without control becomes suffering. Now here's the truth most people avoid. You cannot force consistency from inconsistent people. You cannot force honesty from dishonest people. You cannot force clarity from confused people. You cannot force timing from life. So stop trying. Stop negotiating with reality. Start responding to it. That is emotional maturity. Now understand this deeply. Detachment is not loss. It is protection. Protection of your peace. Protection of your energy. Protection of your focus. Because every time you try to control what you cannot control, you lose energy that could have been used for growth. And growth is what actually changes your life. Not waiting, not chasing, not analyzing endlessly, but building. Now let's bring it back to the core principle of this book. Nobody can hurt you if you master this mindset. Because once you detach from what you cannot control, people lose the ability to destabilize you. Situations lose the ability to break you. Uncertainty loses the ability to control you, and you become grounded in something stronger than emotion. You become grounded in discipline. So here is your instruction. Stop trying to control people. Start controlling your response. Stop demanding outcomes. Start focusing on effort. Stop waiting for closure. Start creating it internally. You have a choice. Always. Hold on to what you cannot control, or release it and regain your peace. That is the dividing line between suffering and strength. And once you cross it, your entire emotional system upgrades. Because now you are no longer reacting to life. You are responding with clarity. And that is real freedom. Now that you have learned how to detach from what is not yours to control, we move into something even more powerful. Chapter 4. Rejection is redirection. Let's correct a misunderstanding that destroys more confidence than anything else in life. Rejection is not the problem. Your interpretation of rejection is the problem. That is where suffering begins. Not in the rejection itself, but in what you make it mean about you. You have a choice, always. Either you see rejection as a final judgment on your worth, or you see it as information about direction. That's the key. Because rejection only feels painful when identity depends on acceptance. Let that sink in. If your identity is built on approval, then rejection feels like collapse. But if your identity is built on discipline, rejection becomes feedback, not failure, feedback. Now listen carefully. Most people confuse being not chosen with being not worthy. And that confusion destroys mental stability. Because now, every rejection becomes personal. Every no becomes emotional damage. Every closed door becomes self-doubt. But here is the truth you must internalize. Not chosen does not mean not worthy. Repeat that. Not chosen does not mean not worthy. Because your value is not determined in moments of selection. Your value is not created by external approval. Your value is constant. But your direction changes. And rejection is often just a redirection of that direction. Now let's go deeper. Every closed door has one of three purposes. It saves time, it reveals truth, or it redirects energy. That's it. Nothing more. Not punishment, not humiliation, not identity destruction. Just correction. But emotional thinking refuses to see it that way. Emotional thinking says, they didn't choose me, so something is wrong with me. That is the distortion. And that is what you must break. It's not about rejection. It's about identity attachment. When your identity is fragile, rejection feels like attack. When your identity is strong, rejection feels like data. Now let's make this practical. Imagine you apply for something, a job, a relationship, an opportunity, and you get rejected. Most people stop there mentally. They say, I'm not good enough. I wasn't meant for this. I failed. And they internalize a moment as a permanent label. But disciplined thinking responds differently. It says, this door is closed. Why? What does this reveal about direction? What should I adjust? That is power. You have a choice. Always. Collapse emotionally or extract information intelligently. That's the difference between people who grow and people who stay stuck. Now let's go deeper into emotional mechanics. Rejection hurts most when expectation is attached to outcome. When you expect acceptance as confirmation of worth, rejection becomes identity threat. But when you expect nothing except effort, rejection becomes neutral, and neutrality is freedom. Now I want you to understand something important. Life does not reject you. Life redirects you, but only if you are willing to move. Because if you stay emotionally stuck in rejection, you block the redirection. You turn a temporary moment into a permanent mindset. And that is where people lose years of progress, not because they were rejected, but because they never moved after rejection. Now listen closely. Every time a door closes, something important is happening. You are being filtered away from paths not aligned with you, or you are being protected from outcomes that would have cost more than they gave, or you are being redirected towards something you are not yet aware of. But you only see that if you stay mentally flexible. Rigid minds see rejection as final. Strong minds see rejection as directional. Now repeat this internally. Not chosen does not mean not worthy. Again, not chosen does not mean not worthy. Because if you forget that, you will start building your identity on approval cycles. And approval cycles are unstable. One day you are validated. Next day you are discarded. One moment you feel valuable, next moment you feel worthless. That is not strength. That is emotional dependency. Now here is the shift. You don't need their permission to be valuable. You don't need their acceptance to be capable. You don't need their recognition to continue growing. You have a choice. Either wait for validation or continue building regardless of rejection. That is discipline. That is emotional control. That is power. Let's bring this into real life again. Someone doesn't choose you. Instead of spiraling emotionally, you pause. You don't personalize immediately. You ask, is this rejection or redirection? What is this saving me from? What is this pushing me toward? Because not all doors are meant to open, and not all opportunities are meant to stay available. Sometimes rejection is protection you don't understand yet. Now listen carefully. The strongest people do not avoid rejection. They interpret it differently. They don't say, why not me? They say, what next? That shift changes everything. Because one question keeps you stuck in identity. The other moves you into growth. Now let's reinforce the core truth again. Not chosen does not mean not worthy. Your worth is not under review. Your value is not being tested. Your identity is not up for negotiation. Only your direction is being refined. And if you understand that, rejection loses emotional power. It still exists, but it no longer controls you. Now let's tie this back to the core of this book. Nobody can hurt you if you master this mindset. Because once rejection stops defining you, you stop fearing it. Once you stop fearing it, you stop avoiding opportunities. And when you stop avoiding opportunities, you start growing faster than people who are still emotionally attached to outcomes. That is freedom. So here is your instruction. When you face rejection, stop personalizing. Stop labeling yourself. Stop collapsing emotionally. Instead, ask, what is this redirecting me toward? Because rejection is not the end of your path. It is a signpost, a correction, a redirection. And once you understand that, you stop losing confidence when doors close. You start gaining clarity instead. And clarity is stronger than confidence. Now you are learning to detach from emotional interpretation. You are learning to separate identity from outcome. You are learning to see rejection as information, not definition. And that is a major shift in mindset. Because now, nothing outside you can define you anymore. Not approval, not rejection, not selection, only your response. And that is where real mental strength begins. Now that you understand rejection as redirection, we move deeper into control of perception itself. Chapter 5. Silence is a shield. Let's be clear about something most people never learn. You are not obligated to respond to everything. Not every insult deserves a reply. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every opinion requires defense. And not every attack deserves your energy. You have a choice. Always. Speak or stay silent. React or observe. Defend or detach. That's the key. Because silence is not weakness. Silence is protection. Silence is control. Silence is a shield. Now listen carefully. Most people lose power because they speak too much. They explain too much. They justify too much. They react too quickly. And in doing so, they give energy to things that should have been ignored. Because every time you respond emotionally, you are participating in someone else's noise. And noise drains power. Silence preserves it. Let that sink in. Not every battle is yours to fight. Not every comment is yours to answer. Not every misunderstanding is yours to fix. But weak minds believe they must respond to everything to prove themselves. They think silence means defeat. They think silence means acceptance. They think silence means weakness. But strong minds understand something different. Silence means control. Silence means discipline. Silence means superiority over reaction. Now repeat this internally. I don't need their permission to stay silent. Again, I don't need their permission to stay silent. Because silence is not something you ask for. It is something you choose. And that choice determines your emotional strength. Now let's go deeper. Weak people explain constantly. They over-justify. They defend their every action. They react to every accusation. They try to correct every misunderstanding. And in doing so, they lose authority. Because over-explaining signals insecurity. It signals dependence on approval. It signals lack of control. Strong people do the opposite. They say less. They move quietly. They allow actions to speak. They allow time to reveal truth. That's the difference. Not loudness, not arguments, not constant clarification, but restraint. Now let's bring this into real life. Imagine someone tries to provoke you publicly. They say something disrespectful. They try to trigger emotion. They want a reaction, because your reaction is their entertainment, and your response is their validation. So what do most people do? They react immediately. They defend themselves. They argue. They escalate the situation. And now they are trapped in a cycle of emotional reaction. But a disciplined mind does something different. It pauses. It observes. It does not rush to respond. It does not feed the situation. It stays calm and continues building. That is power. You have a choice. Either enter the noise or rise above it. And when you choose silence, something powerful happens. The situation loses control over you. The person loses emotional access to you, and your energy remains intact. Now understand this deeply. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is strategy. Silence is discipline. Silence is emotional economy. You are choosing where your energy goes and where it does not go. Because energy wasted on unnecessary reaction is energy stolen from your life. Let's go deeper. Every time you respond emotionally to provocation, you are doing three things. You are validating the provocation. You are extending the conflict. You are weakening your focus. But when you stay silent, you deny validation. You break the cycle. You protect focus. That is why silence is powerful. Not because it says nothing, but because it says everything without wasting energy. Now listen carefully. You don't need their permission to remain silent. You don't need to explain your silence. You don't need to justify your calmness. You don't need to prove your restraint. That is the discipline. Now let's connect this to identity. People who constantly respond to everything are controlled by external triggers. They live reactively. They live emotionally unstable. They live in constant defense mode. But people who master silence are different. They are grounded. They are intentional. They are unshakable. Because they understand a simple truth. Not everything deserves access to your voice. Now let's bring in a real example. Someone misunderstands you. Instead of immediately correcting them, you pause, you observe. You realize that explaining will not change their mindset. So you stay silent, and you continue your life. At first this feels uncomfortable, because ego wants correction, ego wants validation, ego wants to be understood immediately. But discipline says otherwise. Discipline says, not every misunderstanding is your responsibility. Not every opinion needs correction. Not every belief about you needs to be fixed. You have a choice. Either drain energy explaining yourself endlessly, or protect energy by staying silent. That's the difference. Now repeat this. Silence protects my energy. Again, silence protects my energy. Because every unnecessary explanation is a leak of power. And power must be preserved. Now, let's go deeper into emotional control. When you stop reacting to everything, you start noticing something important. You stop being easily triggered. You stop being emotionally reactive. You stop being pulled into unnecessary conflict. And your life becomes calmer. Not because the world changed, but because your response changed. That is the transformation. Now let's tie this back to the core of this book. Nobody can hurt you if you master this mindset. Because once you stop reacting to everything, people lose access to your emotional energy. Insults lose power. Provocation loses effect. Misunderstanding loses control. And silence becomes your shield. So here is your instruction. When something tries to provoke you, pause. Do not respond immediately. Ask yourself, is this worth my energy? If the answer is no, stay silent. Move forward. Build your life. Because silence is not absence of strength. Silence is proof of strength. And when you master silence, you stop participating in unnecessary battles. You start winning without fighting. And that is real control. Now you are learning something deeper than emotional control. You are learning energy discipline. And that is what separates reactive people from powerful ones. Now that you understand silence as a shield, we move into something even more transformative. Chapter 6. Build a life that needs no approval. Let's get something straight. If your life depends on approval, you are not free. You are controlled. Controlled by opinions. Controlled by praise. Controlled by criticism. Controlled by people who are not living your life, but still shaping your emotions. And that is the problem. You have a choice. Always. Either you build your life for approval, or you build your life for discipline. That's the key. Because approval addiction creates emotional dependency. And emotional dependency destroys stability. Now listen carefully. When you depend on approval, your emotional state becomes unstable. One compliment lifts you, One criticism breaks you. One like makes you feel worthy. One rejection makes you question everything. That is not strength. That is emotional slavery disguised as social validation. And most people live like this without realizing it. They wake up and unconsciously ask, do people approve of me? Am I being accepted? Am I being liked? And their mood shifts based on external feedback. That means they are not in control of their inner world. Other people are. Now repeat this internally. I don't need their permission to stay stable. Again, I don't need their permission to stay stable. Because stability is not given, it is built, and it is built through internal standards, not external applause. Now let's go deeper. The stronger path is private standards over public applause. Let that sink in. Private standards mean you define your behavior when nobody is watching. You define your discipline when nobody is clapping. You define your effort when nobody is praising. That is real character. Because applause is temporary, attention is inconsistent. But discipline is permanent. Now understand this clearly. If you only work when people notice, you are controlled by attention. If you only feel motivated when people praise you, you are controlled by validation. If you only feel worthy when others approve, you are controlled externally. But if you build private standards, you become internally governed. And that is where power begins. You have a choice. Either live for reactions from others, or live for standards within yourself. Now let's break a common illusion. People think success brings approval. But in reality, approval is unpredictable. Sometimes success is praised. Sometimes it is doubted. Sometimes it is ignored. Sometimes it is criticized. So if your emotional stability depends on approval, you will never be stable. Because approval is inconsistent. But discipline is consistent. Now I want you to repeat something simple but powerful. If they clap, keep working. If they doubt, keep working. Again. If they clap, keep working. If they doubt, keep working. Because your direction does not change based on reactions. Your discipline does not fluctuate based on opinions. Your progress does not depend on validation. Now let's go deeper into behavior. Approval addiction creates 3 problems. First, you start performing instead of building. Second, you start seeking validation instead of progress. Third, you start adjusting yourself to please others instead of growing yourself. And slowly, you lose authenticity. You stop building your life, and you start building an image of your life. But images are fragile. They depend on perception, and perception can change instantly. Now let's bring this into real life. Someone posts something, they check likes, they check comments, they check reactions, and their mood rises or falls based on numbers. That is emotional dependence on external approval. Now compare that to a disciplined mind. A disciplined mind creates, executes, and moves on. No emotional dependency on response. No identity tied to reaction. Just action, consistency, and growth. That is freedom. Now understand this deeply. You are not trying to eliminate feedback. Feedback is useful, but dependency on feedback is dangerous, because feedback should guide improvement, not define self-worth. That's the key. Now repeat this internally. My worth is not decided by approval. Again, my worth is not decided by approval, because worth is internal, not external. Now let's go deeper. If you live for approval, you will start shaping your personality to fit expectations. You will say what people want to hear. You will do what people expect you to do. You will avoid discomfort to maintain acceptance. And slowly, you stop being yourself. But if you live for discipline, you become consistent regardless of attention. You do what is necessary, not what is popular. You build what matters, not what impresses. And that is where real strength develops. Now here is the truth most people avoid. Approval is addictive because it gives temporary emotional reward. But discipline is powerful because it gives permanent internal respect. One is external stimulation. The other is internal foundation. Now let's connect this back to the core message of this book. Nobody can hurt you if you master this mindset. Because once you stop needing approval, criticism loses power, praise loses control, rejection loses identity impact, and you become stable regardless of external response. So here is your instruction. Stop adjusting your life for applause. Stop changing yourself for validation. Start building your life based on discipline. Start acting based on standards. Start moving regardless of attention. Always. Either chase approval endlessly or build a life that does not depend on it. That's the shift. And once you make it, your emotional world stabilizes. Because now your worth is not on trial. Your actions are not dependent on reaction. Your identity is not shaped by external voices. Now let's reinforce the core principle. If they clap, keep working. If they doubt, keep working. Because both are distractions. Both are temporary. Both are external noise. And you are building something internal, something stable, something real. Now you are learning to detach from validation. You are learning to build internal standards. You are learning to live from discipline, not approval. And that is a major step toward emotional independence. Because once you stop needing approval, you stop being controlled by it. And when that happens, you become free. Now that you've learned to build a life that needs no approval, we move into something even deeper. Chapter 7. Pain is a teacher, not a prison. Let's be direct. Pain is not your enemy. Your misunderstanding of pain is the real problem, because pain itself is neutral. It only becomes destruction when you refuse to learn from it. You have a choice, always. Either you turn pain into identity, or you turn pain into education. That's the key, and the difference between those two decisions determines whether you stay stuck or grow stronger. Now listen carefully. Most people do not suffer because of pain. They suffer because they repeat pain mentally every single day. They replay it. They relive it. They reconstruct it. They keep the wound alive long after the moment is gone. And that is where pain becomes poison, not in the event, but in the repetition. Let that sink in. Pain becomes poison only when it is repeated in the mind without learning. Now repeat this internally. I do not need to relive what I need to learn from. Again, I do not need to relive what I need to learn from, because repetition without reflection creates suffering. But reflection without repetition creates wisdom. That is the difference. Now let's go deeper. Pain has a function. It teaches, not punishes, not destroys, teaches. Betrayal teaches discernment. Failure teaches strategy. Loss teaches gratitude and emotional strength. Every painful experience carries information, but most people miss the information because they are focused only on the emotion. And when emotion dominates, learning disappears. Now understand this clearly. Betrayal is not just pain, it is information about trust. Failure is not just embarrassment, it is information about strategy. It is information about attachment. Everything painful is educational if you are willing to interpret it correctly. You have a choice. Either interpret pain emotionally or interpret pain intelligently. That's the key. Now let's bring this into real life. Think about a breakup. For one person, it becomes identity collapse. I am not enough. I am not lovable. I will never recover. And they turn a moment into a life sentence. But for another person, the same breakup becomes awakening. They reflect, they adjust, they grow, they understand what was unhealthy, they learn what to avoid, they rebuild stronger boundaries. Same event, completely different outcome. Not because the pain changed, but because interpretation changed. Now let's go deeper. Pain becomes a prison when you attach identity to it. When you say, this happened to me, therefore this is who I am. That is the trap. But when you detach identity from pain, something powerful happens. You become an observer instead of a victim, and observers learn, victims repeat. Now repeat this. Pain is information, not identity. Again, pain is information, not identity. Because identity built on pain is fragile, but identity built on learning is strong. Now listen carefully. You don't need their permission to heal. You don't need time to fix you. You don't need external validation to recover. Healing begins the moment you stop repeating the wound mentally. That is the shift. Not forgetting, not suppressing, but stopping repetition. Now let's break another illusion. People think healing is time-based, but time alone does nothing. Time without awareness just extends suffering. What strengthens you is interpretation. What frees you is learning. Now, let's go deeper. When pain hits, you have two paths. Path 1, repetition. You replay it, you relive it, you reinforce it, and you stay stuck. Path 2, reflection. You analyze it, you extract meaning, you adjust behavior, and you grow. You have a choice, always, and that choice determines your future. Now, listen closely. Strong people do not avoid pain. They extract from it. They use it. They transform it. They convert it into clarity. Weak people become trapped in emotional loops. Strong people break the loop through understanding. Now I want you to repeat this. What I learn from pain frees me. What I repeat from pain traps me. Again, what I learn from pain frees me. What I repeat from pain traps me. That is the dividing line. Now let's bring this into behavior. If you experienced betrayal, do not ask, why me, endlessly. Ask, what did this reveal about patterns? If you experienced failure, do not say, I am not good enough. Ask, what strategy needs adjustment? If you experienced loss, do not collapse into identity crisis. Ask, what attachment needs rebalancing? Because every painful experience has a question hidden inside it, and that question leads to growth, but only if you ask it. Now here is the truth most people miss. Pain is not meant to stay. It is meant to move you, to change you, to sharpen you, to wake you up. But if you resist it, you freeze inside it, and that is where people suffer the most. But in the refusal to move forward mentally. Now let's connect this back to the core of this book. Nobody can hurt you if you master this mindset. Because once you understand pain as a teacher, you stop fearing it, you stop avoiding it, you stop identifying with it, and you start using it. And when pain becomes useful, it loses power over you. So here is your instruction. When something hurts, do not repeat it endlessly. Do not build identity around it. Do not stay emotionally trapped in it. Instead ask, what is this teaching me? Because every painful moment is either a prison or a lesson, and you decide which one it becomes. You have a choice, always. Either stay trapped in emotional repetition or move into intelligent reflection. That's the shift. And once you make it, pain no longer controls your life. It informs it. Now you are learning to detach from emotional suffering. You are learning to transform experience into wisdom. You are learning to turn breakdown into direction. And that is real strength. Because now nothing you go through is wasted. Everything becomes input for growth. Now that you understand pain as a teacher, we move into the next level of control. Chapter 8. Guard your mind daily. Let's be direct. Your life is not shaped first by events. It is shaped by what enters your mind repeatedly. That is the real control system. Not circumstances, not people, not luck, but input. What you consume daily becomes what you become internally. You have a choice, always. Either you protect your mind, or you allow everything into it. That's the key. Because your mind is not a storage space for randomness. It is a formation system. And whatever enters it consistently will shape your thoughts, emotions, and reactions. Now listen carefully. Most people feel unstable not because life is unstable, but because their input is unstable. They consume chaos, then they expect peace. They consume negativity, then they expect clarity. They consume distraction, then they expect focus. That is not how the mind works. The mind reflects what it absorbs. Now repeat this internally. What enters my mind becomes what I feel. Again, what enters my mind becomes what I feel. Because input is not neutral, it is programming, and repeated programming becomes identity. Now let's go deeper. Your mind is shaped by 4 main inputs: conversations, media, habits, environment. Every one of these is either building you or breaking you. There is no neutral zone. If you are surrounded by chaos, your mind learns chaos. If you are surrounded by discipline, your mind learns discipline. If you consume negativity, your emotions become reactive. If you consume focus, your behavior becomes structured. That's the key. Now understand this clearly. If you consume chaos, you will feel chaos. It is not theoretical. It is automatic. Your nervous system adapts to repetition. So if your daily input is scattered, emotional, dramatic, and noisy, your mind will reflect that state. You will feel restless without reason. You will feel distracted without cause. You will feel mentally overloaded without explanation. But the explanation is simple. Your inputs are chaotic. Now let's flip it. If you feed discipline, you will feel strength. If you consume calm information, your mind becomes calm. If you surround yourself with focused energy, your attention becomes sharper. If you train your environment, your behavior aligns with it. That is transformation, not motivation, not emotion, but structure. Now listen carefully. You are not just influenced by major life events. You are influenced by micro-exposures. The small conversations, the random content, the background noise, the people you tolerate, the environments you stay in. All of it adds up, and slowly it shapes your mental baseline. You don't notice it happening, but you feel the result. Now repeat this. Protect the gate, protect the mind. Again, protect the gate, protect the mind. Because your mind has a gate, and everything you allow through that gate becomes part of your thinking system. Now let's go deeper. Weak people expose their minds to everything. They scroll endlessly. They consume everything. They listen to everything. They allow every voice into their head. And then they wonder why they feel confused, anxious, and distracted. But strong people are selective. They filter input. They choose environments carefully. They control what enters their mental space. Not because they fear the world, but because they understand the cost of exposure. Now, let's make this practical. Look at media consumption. If you constantly consume negativity, drama, outrage, comparison, and emotional noise, your mind will not stay calm. Even if your life is fine, even if nothing is wrong, your internal state will feel unstable. Why? Because your input is unstable. Now apply this to conversations. If you constantly engage in gossip, negativity, complaining, or emotionally draining discussions, your mind absorbs that tone. You start thinking in the same patterns. You start reacting in the same way, and slowly your mental clarity weakens. Now apply this to environment. If your environment is chaotic, disorganized, and reactive, your mind mirrors it, because the brain adapts to surroundings. Now understand this deeply. You are not just a thinker. You are a product of your inputs. So if you want a stronger mind, you must control what enters it. That is discipline. Now here is the truth most people ignore. You don't rise to your intentions. You fall to your environment. Let that sink in, because intention is weak without structure, but environment is powerful without effort. Now let's go deeper. Guarding your mind is not isolation. It is selection. You are not avoiding life. You are choosing what influences your life. That is control. You have a choice. Either consume everything passively or filter everything intentionally. That's the shift. Now repeat this internally. I control what enters my mind. Again, I control what enters my mind, because if you don't control input, input controls you. Now let's bring this into behavior. Start noticing what you consume daily. Not just once, but repeatedly. Does this build clarity or chaos? Does this build discipline or distraction? Does this build strength or weakness? Because everything you consume is either adding structure to your mind or adding noise. There is no neutral consumption. Now let's connect this back to the core message of this book. Nobody can hurt you if you master this mindset. Because once your mind is protected, external chaos loses influence. People's negativity loses impact. Random events lose emotional control. And you remain stable because your internal environment is controlled, not your external one. So here is your instruction. Stop exposing your mind to unnecessary chaos. Stop consuming things that weaken your focus. Start protecting your attention like it is valuable, because it is. You have a choice, always. Either protect the gate or let everything in. And once everything enters your mind, everything affects your life. That is why discipline starts at input level, not reaction level. Now you are learning something deeper than emotional control. You are learning mental hygiene. You are learning input discipline. You are learning environmental awareness. And that is what creates stability over time. Because a protected mind becomes a stable mind. And a stable mind becomes a powerful mind. Now that you understand how to guard your mind daily, we move into the next level of emotional independence. Chapter 9. Become emotionally independent. Let's be direct. If your emotions depend on other people, you are not free. You are reactive. You are unstable. You are controlled. Because every person around you becomes a switch for your emotional state. One message lifts you. One silence breaks you. One reply gives you peace. One delay creates anxiety. That is not strength. That is emotional dependence. You have a choice, always. Either you depend on others to feel okay, or you learn to create your own emotional state. That's the key. Now listen carefully. Emotional dependence says one dangerous sentence. I need them to feel okay. I need their attention. I need their response. I need their approval. I need their presence. And every version of that sentence removes power from you and gives it away. Slowly, quietly, consistently, until your emotional world is no longer yours. Now repeat this internally. I create my emotional state. I do not wait for it. Again, I create my emotional state. I do not wait for it. Because emotional stability is not something you receive. It is something you generate. Now let's go deeper. When your peace depends on others, your peace becomes fragile. Because people are unpredictable. They change. They delay. They misunderstand. They ignore. They leave. That is human behavior. And if your stability is tied to unstable things, you will always be unstable. That's the key. But when your peace depends on discipline, your peace becomes stable. Because discipline does not depend on external behavior. It depends on internal control. Your response, your mindset. Now understand this clearly. You are not responsible for other people's behavior, but you are responsible for your emotional reaction to it. You have a choice, always. Either react emotionally to everything, or build internal control that stays steady regardless of external input. Now let's break this down practically. One person panics when ignored. They see silence and immediately think, they are losing interest. They don't care. I did something wrong. And their emotional state collapses instantly, because their stability is tied to response. But another person experiences the same silence differently. They pause. They do not assume. They do not react instantly. They continue their life. They use that space for growth, for focus, for discipline. That is emotional independence. Same situation, different interpretation, different outcome. Now repeat this. Silence does not define me. My reaction does. Again, silence does not define me. My reaction does. Because silence is neutral, but your interpretation is not. Now let's go deeper. Emotional independence is not about ignoring people. It is not about becoming cold. It is not about disconnecting from life. It is about not losing yourself when others change. That's the difference. Now understand this. When your emotional state depends on someone else, you are constantly waiting. Waiting for messages, waiting for replies, waiting for validation, waiting for attention, waiting for reassurance. And waiting destroys presence, because your mind is never where you are. It is always where they are. But when you become emotionally independent, something changes. You stop waiting. You start building. You stop reacting. You start creating. You stop chasing emotional stability. You become emotional stability. That is transformation. Now let's make this real. If someone ignores you, you have a choice. You can spiral emotionally, or you can stay grounded and continue your life. If someone disappoints you, you have a choice. You can collapse into emotional reaction, or you can adjust expectations and move forward. If someone leaves, you have a choice. You can lose your identity, or you can strengthen it. Always a choice. Now repeat this internally. I am the source of my emotional stability. Again, I am the source of my emotional stability. Because if you are not the source, you will always be dependent on external conditions, and external conditions are never stable. Now let's go deeper. Emotional independence creates 3 major shifts. First, you stop overreacting. Second, you stop overattaching. Third, you stop overthinking. Because your emotional state is no longer fragile. It is grounded. Now here is the truth most people avoid. You don't need constant emotional stimulation. You don't need constant validation. You don't need constant reassurance. You need stability. And stability comes from discipline, not dependency. Now let's connect this to real life again. Imagine 2 people. One is emotionally dependent. They check messages constantly. They wait for responses. They analyze silence. They overthink everything. Their mood changes based on external feedback. The other person is emotionally independent. They engage when necessary. They focus on their goals. They use silence as space for growth. They do not collapse when nothing happens. Same world, completely different experience. Now understand this deeply. Emotional independence is power because it removes control from external sources. Nobody can destabilize you easily. Nobody can control your mood instantly. Nobody can shift your identity with their behavior, because your emotional center is internal. Now let's bring this back to the core message of this book. Nobody can hurt you if you master this mindset, because once your emotions are no longer dependent on others, their behavior loses control over you. Their absence loses emotional impact. Their presence loses emotional authority, and you become steady regardless of external changes. So here is your instruction. Stop outsourcing your emotional state. Stop waiting for others to stabilize you. Start building internal emotional control. You have a choice, always. Either depend on people to feel okay, or become the source of your own emotional stability. That's the shift. Now you are learning something deeper than emotional control. You are learning emotional ownership. You are learning internal stability. You are learning independence from external validation. And that is real freedom. Because when your emotional state no longer depends on anyone else, you are finally free to live without fear. Now that you understand emotional independence, we move into the final transformation of this journey. Chapter 10. Become untouchable through purpose. Let's bring everything together. If you want to become emotionally untouchable, it does not start with avoiding pain. It does not start with avoiding people. It does not start with avoiding conflict. It starts with purpose. Because without purpose, your mind becomes available to everything. Every distraction, every opinion, every insult, every irrelevant emotional trigger. But with purpose, your mind becomes focused, and focus changes everything. You have a choice, always. Either live reactively or live purposefully. That's the key, because purpose shrinks petty pain. When you have a mission, small problems stop feeling big. When you have direction, emotional noise loses importance. When you have something meaningful to build, meaningless distractions stop controlling you. Now listen carefully. Most people suffer not because their problems are big, but because their purpose is small. When your life has no direction, everything becomes important. A comment becomes a crisis. A delay becomes anxiety. A misunderstanding becomes emotional damage. A rejection becomes identity collapse. Why? Because there is nothing stronger in your life to override it. But when purpose enters your life, everything changes. You stop reacting to everything. You start filtering everything. That's the key. Now repeat this internally. Small minds chase drama. Strong minds chase purpose. Again, small minds chase drama. Strong minds chase purpose. Because drama is emotional entertainment, but purpose is direction. And direction eliminates confusion. Now let's go deeper. Focused people suffer less. Not because life is easier for them, but because they have less time for nonsense. They are not mentally available for every distraction. They are not emotionally accessible to every trigger. They are not psychologically open to every opinion, because their attention is already assigned. And where attention goes, energy follows. Now, understand this clearly. If your attention is scattered, your life feels scattered. If your attention is undirected, your emotions feel unstable. If your attention is consumed by external noise, your mind becomes reactive. But when attention is locked into purpose, something powerful happens. You stop being emotionally reactive. You start being strategically focused. You don't get pulled into unnecessary conflict. You don't get trapped in irrelevant emotions. You don't get controlled by temporary situations. Now let's make this practical. When someone tries to provoke you, a focused mind does not engage. When something does not matter, a focused mind does not react. When drama appears, a focused mind redirects attention back to purpose. You have a choice, always. Either feed distractions or feed direction. Now let's go deeper. Purpose is not just ambition. Purpose is structure. Purpose is emotional protection. Purpose is mental clarity. Because when your mind is occupied with meaningful progress, it has no space for emotional clutter. Now repeat this. My purpose protects my peace. Again, my purpose protects my peace. Because purpose acts like a filter. It removes unnecessary emotional interference. It eliminates pointless reactions. It reduces overthinking. It stabilizes your identity. Now let's bring this into reality. Think about two people. One has no clear direction. They wake up, they scroll, they react, they compare, they overthink, they get emotionally affected by everything around them. Their life feels heavy, even when nothing is wrong. Now compare that to a focused person. They wake up with intention. They work towards something meaningful. They measure progress, not opinions. They prioritize building, not reacting. Their emotional energy is preserved, not because life is easier, but because their focus is stronger. Now understand this deeply. Small minds chase drama. Strong minds chase purpose. Drama keeps you reactive. Purpose makes you intentional. Drama consumes your attention. Purpose directs your attention. Drama drains your energy. Purpose builds your energy. Now let's connect this to the entire book. Nobody can hurt you if you master this mindset. Because once purpose becomes your center, everything else loses emotional control over you. Insults lose impact. Rejection loses identity power. Distractions lose attraction. And life becomes structured instead of reactive. Now, here is your instruction. Stop feeding your attention to things that do not build your future. Stop reacting to things that do not improve your direction. Start investing your energy into what matters. You have a choice, always. Either stay emotionally available to everything, or become focused enough to be untouched by most things. That's the shift. Now let's go even deeper. Purpose is what turns emotional chaos into emotional discipline. Because when you are building something meaningful, you naturally become less reactive. You naturally become more patient. You naturally become more grounded. Not because emotions disappear, but because direction takes priority. Now repeat this internally. I choose purpose over reaction. Again, I choose purpose over reaction. Because reaction is short-term emotional behavior, but purpose is long-term identity formation. Now understand this final truth. You don't become untouchable by avoiding life. You become untouchable by being deeply focused on your own path. That is why strong people seem unaffected, not because they feel nothing, but because they are directed towards something greater than emotional disturbance. Now bring everything together. You started by learning control over reactions. You learned detachment from what you cannot control. You learned how rejection redirects you. You learned how silence protects you. You learned how approval is unnecessary. You learned how pain teaches you. You learned how to guard your mind. You learned how to become emotionally independent. And now you understand the final layer. Purpose makes you untouchable. Because when your life has direction, nothing without direction can control you. Now here is your final message. Small minds chase drama. Strong minds chase purpose. Again, small minds chase drama. Strong minds chase purpose. So choose your focus carefully. Choose your attention deliberately. Choose your life intentionally. Because whatever you focus on becomes your reality. And if you focus on purpose, you become untouchable. Nobody can hurt you if you stop cooperating with your own suffering. They can speak, but you decide what enters. They can leave, but you decide what remains. They can reject, betray, ignore, misunderstand, and criticize. But your peace is yours unless you surrender it. Stop giving strangers authority over your emotions. Stop expecting control over what was never yours to control. Stop begging for approval from people who cannot define your worth. Build discipline, build purpose, build silence, build self-respect. When your standards become stronger than their opinions, you become free. When your mission becomes louder than their noise, you become dangerous. When your mind obeys you instead of the world, you become untouchable. So here is your challenge. For the next 7 days, react slower, speak less, focus deeper, and protect your peace like it is priceless, because it is.